So talk us through, just when we talk about UCAS, obviously we assume people know what we're talking about. When we talk about UCAS, what are we talking about, and what makes a UCAS application as we understand it?
Okay, I think the key thing is, and I apologise if this confirms what people already know, but if you are coming from a different national education system, more often than not, people will be applying, whether it's in Brazil, Italy, China, will be applying directly to the university in question, who may give them entrance tests, etc. In America, there are instances of centralized kind of services, like the Common Application. The University of California has its own kind of centralized service. We'll get to that maybe later on. But the thing is that even there, they simply pass on an application to each university, which will make different demands from the applicants from uni to uni. Typically in America, each university will ask the student to write a different personal statement, a different essay. Where UCAS, which is the Universities and Colleges Admission Services for the UK, so even if Scotland does have a different education system before university, it's very much part of the same thing. It is a comprehensive front desk for the universities. It doesn't exist above the universities. It doesn't have an authority. It works in collaboration with. And we've seen this very clearly in sort of changes that have been discussed and enacted and potentially will be. What a UCAS application essentially is where the student will make 5 university choices. It does make sense to have, for each university, a course which is similar to the others, because everything else within that application is being sent to all of the 5 universities. So whether it's the admin side of things, personal details, academic record, the reference that we write, all things I'll go through, and above all, the personal statements, which is the one opportunity for the students, the applicants, to actually justify, to evidence, to convince the admissions officers in the respective universities of their not just interest and passion in the course, but their informed interest, how they linked it to their studies, to their experiences beyond their studies, and, to their future plans as well. So it's very important, and this is the thing that I will hark back to. Many people come to our college, for example, I'm sure it's exactly the same for our sister colleges, with the dream, and possibly their parents' dreams, of, as you very well know, of going to LSE, going to Oxford, going to Cambridge, going to Imperial College London, or like one student, I've got to do fashion management at the University of Manchester. It can be a lot more specific, but we have to remember in the first instance that what characterizes the application is not any one university that's included in it, even Oxford and Cambridge. It's the course being applied for. They do not need to be identical, but there needs to be a common denominator, because there is only one personal statement which has to tick the boxes for all 5 universities. So that's kind of the overall picture.
So students will apply to kind of related courses, generally speaking.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would add one final point. You apply to 5 universities. Each university cannot see which other university you've applied to. So it's very important there. And some universities, I mentioned the LSEs, the Imperials, they will say, well, we want these particulars in a personal statement. But you will see that that's where we step in, where we can, simultaneously tick different universities' boxes.
And obviously, in the UK, there are many different universities and different groupings with different kind of focuses and functions. Does it make an impact on your UCAS application in terms of universities that you select?
Well, the universities you select, first and foremost, they have to, I've said about the subject area, so we'll never lose sight of that. The universities you select, there are 2 things to bear in mind, and it all comes down to when the student gets to the point of making the application, and when the application fully comes to fruition. That will be at the start of year 13, even if, as with our students, the work really starts in year 12. The student will have predicted grades for their A-levels, for their foundation, etc. And the choices need to be aspirational, realistic, safe, relative to those predicted grades. If a student has been predicted even 3As at A level, if one or two of the choices are asking for ultra competitive courses for AA star A, then that makes an aspirational unrealistic. The other point I would make is you have 5 choices for a good reason. It is literally about risk management. You can, as a rule of thumb, have 2 choices which are aspirational, which are, you know, the most optimistic, you know, forward-looking projection of where your A levels or foundation grades at the end will be. Again, as a rule of thumb, I'd say 1 or 2 which are, let's call them more realistic, more safer choices. But it's really important that we have, again, depending on the numbers, the distribution, 1 or 2 which are insurances. Because I will say now, this is important, even if we'll talk about the timeline later, that you make 5 choices initially. Now, and then depending, obviously, irrespective of how many offers you get, let's say you get 3 or 4, once the last university has replied, the student then, in consultation with us, of course, has time, but then has to make a decision on final 2 choices, on a firm and insurance. The only reason I mention this now is because the insurance choice needs to be an insurance. To have 5 universities which ask for A star AA means realistically you can only make 1 choice at the end, because if the insurance choice has the same grade, you either get into your firm choice or you don't get the grades and you get into neither. I'm ignoring other requirements like IELTS, etc., which will be mentioned later. But that's why it's important to kind of spread the university choices. And I would say at the outset, we're going to talk about the steps you take, is know what's available. Because what you also want to do is avoid the bottlenecks, basically where everybody applies for the same universities. I'm not an economist, but I've got a very simplistic grasp of supply and demand. The more people who apply for the same number of places at, for example, LSE, you know, the price goes up. The price are the entry grades. And lots of people will apply to universities, for example, in London, because they want to be in London. But again, that increases the demand. Grades expectations will go up. So one of our major efforts when we start the UCAS drive directly with Year 12s is always to help students be aware of simply how much is on offer out there.
Yeah. And the UCAS system allows students to be ambitious, but there has to be an element of realism in terms of how that aligns.
You're spreading the risk.
Yeah. And obviously that's where a big part of the role is very important in terms of that support we can provide.
100%.
So obviously, take us through kind of the components that make up an application within the UCAS system and kind of how they are weighted, I suppose, in terms of ultimate importance to the university. So what are the different steps, not steps, but what are the components of an application?
Okay, I mean, it is an application form, you know, online, albeit. Students will basically register themselves, again, through the college for the application system. This is referred to as the UCAS Hub. This was introduced about 3 years ago. But the application, I think we can subdivide it into 3 parts, really. You've got the main kind of admin part of the application, where there will be personal details, nationality details, vital for overseas applicants, non-British applicants, because there will be a visa factor there, and the accuracy of that information, which includes the type of visa they're on at the moment, if they're in the UK, for example, doing A-levels or foundation with us, that information will, right at the end of the process, be included by the university that is confirmed for the student, for the given applicant, and sent as part of the CAS to the UKVI for the visa. So lots of details like that. I would highlight particularly the education section, which needs to be accurate and comprehensive in terms of telling the university what the student has done, not only what they are doing at present, which then ties to the predicted grades they will be given, but also what they've done previously, what has been their journey educationally. Now, this is important, and we spend quite a lot of time making sure we've got a very accurate fix on this, because if a student is coming, for example, for argument's sake, from the USA, from most of continental Europe, from China, from Iran, etc., where they may have finished the, let's say, grade 10, which corresponds to year 11 in the UK, which is when students in the UK will have done GCSEs. Maybe international students will have been at an international school and done GCSEs or IGCSEs, which is a clear, doesn't require converting. But those students, clearly, if you have finished 10th grade, year 10 in mainland China, you will not have finished senior high school. There will still be 2 years left to do. Some students join us when they finish the penultimate year, grade 11. A few when they have actually finished high school and maybe not done the university entrance exam. But the point I'm going to make is that we need to tell the universities where the students have studied, but we won't necessarily have grades to report, because we can only, in the admin section of the UCAS application, report completed qualifications. However, one thing that we have taken advantage of in the reference, which I'll mention in a moment, which is what the college writes to support each application, is that we will give detail on the students, added detail on the applicant's educational journey. So if, for example, in China or in Italy, or as I said, in the US, wherever it may be, they finished year 10, grade 10, and therefore still had a couple of years to complete that national education system, they won't have any qualifications to put in, but we will quote the best marks from their latest transcript, so report card, in our reference. Okay, so there are elements that allow you to fill in the blanks. So that's important. But on the whole, that's the admin section. I should mention in that as well, I'd hardly call it admin, but that's where you put the 5 choices as well. Then the other 2 sections are really the qualitative parts, the prose parts, and they are the student's personal statement, which, as I said, it's technically, if you look at it in type terms, it's a side of A4. Technically, it's 4,000 characters, including spaces. There are other kind of limitations, but those really become relevant when we finalize the actual personal statement. And this is simply an essay, which I have to make it very, very clear, needs to be written by the student. So even with the best will in the world, whether it's parents, agents, teachers, etc., it's very important that we emphasize the word personal here. And it's not an essay that will be marked. It's an essay that needs to convince that the student, as I said before, has got real experiences, good reasons for wanting to study what they want to study at university, experiences, whether it's work experience, if it's a vocational course like law, engineering, medicine, etc., or it could be reading, it could be attending lectures, things outside their studies as well as in their studies, experiences that have kind of snowballed the interest and experiences that they have reflected on. So one of the things that we often strip out of personal statements is where there's any kind of hint, I won't say of arrogance, but of boasting. I've achieved this, I've achieved this, I've achieved this, which is fine. To be honest, that's what we should be saying in our reference. What they want to see, the admissions officers and the course tutors at universities want to see, is how that experience, not all that, even that achievement, how it's been reflected on and has further informed this pathway of degree, course choice, and potentially career. All right. So personal statement, absolutely vital. I'll talk about the relative importance. I'll answer that bit of the question in a moment. The final piece in the jigsaw is our reference. It works on the same parameters. We draw on the teacher's feedback. So we have a whole system of gathering this. I'm sure that's absolutely the same for our sister colleges. And it's basically where we not try to sell the students, because obviously we've got a reputation to maintain for being factual, accurate, etc. But this is our opportunity to go beyond predicted grades, to paint a picture of the student as a rounded 3-dimensional person, and also to show what they've done. Not so much where their teachers say they've done given questions well in an exam, because again, that's reflected in the predicted grade, but just to say how they've picked up the skills, how they've overcome challenges, how they're enthusiastic, etc. Maybe for weaker applicants, the potentialities they have as well. So that's our reference. We're very much responsible for that. And associated to that are the predicted grades, which we basically, without going into too much detail, are largely influenced by the students' end of year 12 exam performance.
Yeah.
So that's really, and that kind of becomes the kind of
so that would be the mock exams.
Not so much mock exams, I'd say end of year 12 exams, as opposed to, because year 12 students would have some form of mock before those ones, but it's definitely the end of year exams. And I have to make clear here that, like the majority of schools, we do not enter our students for full AS exams, but they are basically examined, assessed on year 12 A-level material.
Okay.
All right. Relative importance, it's very difficult to say because each university admissions office, potentially each faculty admissions office, will have different ways of doing things. But I think if we can generalize, the first check that will happen on any application will be, let's call it an office check, a clerical check. And simply someone who's not going to teach the course, run the course at university will, and also not the people who will actually make the final offer, but there's a check. Is the student doing recognised qualifications? So A-levels, foundation, like our own. Have they got the right subject for the course they're applying for? More often than not, out of 3 A-levels, 1 or 2 need to make a distinct connection. They're called facilitating subjects.
Yeah.
Something like medicine, you need biology and chemistry. Maths is preferable. Something like architecture, physics and maths. Art is a good idea, but you can apply with other subjects as well, where the grade will count. And the other thing that's checked is what are the predicted grades. And here I'd like to, this is my view, I will be honest, but make a case for kind of demolishing a myth that the higher the predicted grades, the stronger the application. If a university says publicly, as in on their website, that these are the grades we require, they will very often, they've started also now saying typical offers. So they'll look back to the previous year and say, typically, okay, our course requires AAB grades in A-levels or 70% in foundation, but the typical offers for last year were AAA. Now, a student having 3 A stars or arguing for 3 A stars, that will not necessarily make their application stronger, because in that first clerical check, it's just a question, right qualification, right subject, do they meet the minimum expectation for predicted grades? After that point, it's the qualitative elements in different ways in different universities, the personal statement, the reference, plus some other elements of an application process, which are outside of UCAS, which will actually decide, are we going to make an offer or not? And let's not forget, the application system is a competitive one. So it's not that you have to meet a criteria and automatically you get an offer. It's relative to the other applicants. And again, that's why we have to be sensible in the 5 choices, not to apply for 5 incredibly popular courses, but again, spread the risk.
Yes. Yeah, to have those insurance choices, like you say, 100%. That are realistic and reasonable.
Or even, attainable. If you don't mind me saying so, very, very good choices, but because, you know, there's an extremely, I'm not plugging anyone, I'm certainly not on a commission, but extremely good law courses at the University of Aberdeen, which is very far away from us in the extreme north of Scotland. Yet I know the University of Aberdeen, the law faculty, is held in very high regard, for example, in Hong Kong. In fact, Hong Kong University draw a lot of their teaching staff from that university. So, but that university will not necessarily ask for 3 A star grades or 2 A star grades, simply because fewer students will apply compared to, say, UCL in London.
Yeah. And in a competitive course like law generally as well, having that kind of strategy where you can kind of understand that is very important.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So obviously we talked a little bit about kind of year 13 being kind of the key period, or the start of year 13 when this kind of all happens. But what is generally the timeline to make an application through UCAS for students?
Above and beyond what the individual schools and colleges do, which I think we might talk about what we do here at Abbey College, Cambridge. In UCAS terms, the first thing to do is to register on the UCAS hub, get the application done, and then there is a submission deadline. Okay, so basically the application is submitted online. It is submitted by the school. Okay, so the student completes their side with us, and when they send the application, they're actually sending it to us for a double check, and we've got various sort of levels of quality assurance, if you like, but also to add the predicted grades and the reference. Then we send the actual application. Now, typically there are two deadlines. As we mentioned last week, if you're applying to the universities of Oxford or Cambridge, and or if you're applying for medicine, dentistry, veterinary science, typically the deadline is the 15th of October. By 6 p.m. on that day, the application has to be sent off. In this current application, it was the 16th because the 15th was a Sunday. So that was just a quirk. So that's when those applications have to be in. For the vast majority of applications, the actual deadline it's kind of settled in the last couple of years to be in the last Wednesday in January, which this current cycle was the 31st of January. Last year it was the 26th. This is what's called, and it's very important to understand why, the equal consideration deadline. What that means technically is that any application received by that date, that the universities must give equal consideration to all the applicants, whether they applied back in November or whether they applied in January.
So there's no preference for an early submission in terms of before the January deadline?
Technically. We prefer, where possible, there will be exceptions, to get the applications in definitely before Christmas, preferably by the end of November. Now, there is, I will call it at best, anecdotal evidence that some universities you actually have a better chance of getting an offer if you do get an application in earlier. Let's be clear, the important thing, what will influence the applicant's chances the most is making a good application, a strong application. It should never be a rushed application. But as I said, we actually click the send button, so we're never going to allow that. But some universities, very, very few, like Edinburgh, said they actually will give preference to students who apply early. What they cannot do is say in mid-January, we have no offers left. That's where the equal consideration factor comes in. I would also add that from our kind of academic year plan, the students getting an application in that little bit sooner, it also means it's job done. And they can focus on the really important business of getting the grades, because with end of year assessments. So the deadline for submission, the latest one is the last Wednesday, the end of January, let's say. After that, the timeline is broadly dictated by how long it takes for the individual universities to give their decisions or reply to the students. Some are very quick, and we saw that very much so with the earlier applications this year. Some, I mean, we are now, what are we, at the end of March, which in my books is only 2 months after the equal consideration deadline. That's still quite soon. Try telling that to the poor students who are waiting. They found that very hard to believe. Last year, we were waiting for offers from the likes of Edinburgh, King's College London, even at the end of May. Let's be clear, no applicant is going to miss a deadline and miss the boat, if you like, because the university is late in getting the decision. It's very frustrating. But if they have not communicated a decision, what we repeat endlessly to our students, and it is absolutely true, is that the university has not made a decision. They are still considering the application. Technically speaking, if all 5 universities reply by the end of March, there's usually, as this year, a mid-May deadline for students to make their final 2 choices, which I'll talk about in a second. If they receive their final replies after the end of March, then it rolls into July. Clearly, we would like for our students to have clarity. We can't rush the situation. We can't push universities. If you push universities, the easy answer is a rejection. So we shouldn't do that. But clearly, if the students are both get their replies, but also then do not kind of procrastinate, delay too much in making those final decisions with us, it also means they've got clear targets for the exams that will start in mid-May as well. Okay, A-level exams. Foundation is different because it rolls through the year, obviously. But basically, by mid-May or by the end of June, let's say beginning of July, the students will have made their final firm and insurance choices. And as I said, the firm choice should be the one that the students, and we don't very often argue against this, but it's the one that motivates them. It's the best of the offers in their eyes. It's very much about perception. Strangely, it's not always the one with the highest grades. Okay, we've had in recent past people getting offers from St Andrews, which are very difficult to get, but they're not necessarily the highest offers. They could be AAB for psychology, for example. But they would put their firm choice and then an insurance choice. So you narrow it down to two, which needs to act as a kind of a safety net. So if you don't get the grades for the firm one, you fall back on the insurance. What you cannot do is later down the line, reject the firm choice and take the insurance. So some real thought has to go into it. The added stipulation we make is that, and this is so important, and I've deliberately left it late again, is that if the students have not been educated previously in a country where the majority language is English, they need to prove their English proficiency.
Yes.
The most common form is doing the IELTS academic through UKVI test, but the TOEFL test, the Pearson test of English, various other forms are there. They may even have a GCSE or IGCSE English first language. English second language is not always accepted by the universities. We need to check that. So it's really, really important that at the point of making firm and insurance choice, at the very least, the insurance choice should have the English requirement met. There is an alternative, which is a pre-sessional English courses. I would say that's going into a bit too much detail at this stage. Everybody's goal, so for anyone out there who is planning ahead, as we said with Oxbridge last week, do your research, get your work experiences, whatever it may be, but 99% build up your academic profile, improve your English, get the English certification, please. It is so fundamental. And then the last kind of step in terms of the student's journey typically is results day. So our foundation students get their results in early July. A-level results are usually the third Thursday of August. This year it's the 15th of August. And automatically there, if the student has either achieved the grades that were in their offer, conditional offer from the university and the English requirements, or in very, very few cases where the university decides, well, they're one grade off, but we've got space, so we'll take them in any case, English requirements are set in stone. They're not flexible because they're locked into visas. Then the university, through UCAS, confirms the place automatically. So typically the question I get on results day from students is, do I need to tell the university I'm coming? You did that when you made them your firm choice or insurance choice. In the background, people may have heard of UCAS clearing, which is kind of the shop window for courses that still have availability and which students can approach those universities, whether they've got their places or not, because some people, sometimes students use it to upgrade a university choice. This used to be called adjustment. It's now just part of clearing because it is utterly the same system. That happens on results day or after results day, and it's absolutely first come, first serve. I would suggest that we cross that bridge when we come to it, if we come to it. It's also worth noting that there's something called UCAS Extra, which runs from the end of February through to the beginning of July before clearing kicks in. And that allows for late applications, or if a student has either received no offers or doesn't like the offers they got and rejects them, they can add one choice. We use that very rarely, but it's a good source of information sometimes. Because what's available in extra at the end of June is likely to be in clearing at the beginning of July. But that's basically the roadmap.
Okay, excellent. I think we've kind of covered a little bit about what happens kind of post-application. Are there any correspondence or any kind of additional kind of tasks that the university might set, for example?
Absolutely. And just to be clear, what we've covered so far, and thank you for framing the questions in this way, it's very, very clear, is what happens in terms of the UCAS process. What you have as a kind of a tangent or a parallel to that, and it depends on the university, it depends on the courses or the faculty. Some courses require admissions tests. So some pure law courses, often referred to as LLB courses, not all of them will require the LNAT test. I could give you the whole range of them. Obviously, medicine now requires the UCAT test uniformly. There's been some change. So Imperial College and University of Cambridge, I don't want to blind people with science, have kind of amalgamated, put together several pre-existing tests, which are all going to be run by the Pearson Exam Board, into something called the ESAT, which will cover a test for natural sciences, for engineering, for mathematics, computer science, etc.
Yeah.
There's also a science-specific test, a maths-specific test. So there are all these things there. And this will be very clear on the university course web pages. Also, in addition, so there are admissions tests. There could be interviews. Again, it's rare.
Yeah.
It's a given for Oxford and Cambridge. It's a given for some very competitive courses. It's a given for a course where you're not just taking a step into university, but into a profession, and especially a public-facing profession. So, for example, if you apply for pharmacy, there will be an interview, okay? Because, again, they have to assess, is it the kind of person who we not consider just academically good enough, but responsible enough to undertake this role?
Yeah.
And let's remember, a role that will also be with children. Yeah,
of course. Yeah.
The only other addition I'd make is that for some courses which have an art element, could have a fashion element. I'm thinking about the courses that we would do. I mean, we don't have a big art school in our college. I know one of our sister colleges does.
Yes.
So they will have much more experience in this. But also architecture, in correspondence to an interview, a portfolio, electronic now, of course, of work done, which can draw on A-level work or personal work, will be submitted as well. Now, as I said, that is down to the individual university. It will be very clear on their website, but also when the student actually puts in the choices, without necessarily confirming them in their application, it highlights those extra requirements. Clearly, we forewarn them because you have to prepare a portfolio, and above all, you have to prepare for these admissions tests.
And will the admissions tests be expected to be taken as before the offer is issued, or are they part of the offer that is issued that you have to achieve a certain score or pass a certain test?
That's a good question, because I mean, there's a very clear answer. It's part of the selection process, so it will happen before. Sometimes, and very often these tests happen online, even essay ones. Sometimes they happen on the day of the interview, if there is an interview. Certainly with Oxford and Cambridge, for example, Abriel, who was with us last week, to get her history offer from St John's College, Cambridge, the day of her interview, she also did the HAA test, the history admissions test. So yes, it's part of the selection process. I should add that sometimes if there is an interview, it's not necessarily a highly kind of selective interview. It's more of a getting to know you exercise. It depends on the university, it depends on the course, because we have to remember that, and I think applicants should always remember this. Yes, you need to prove to the university you're worthy of an offer. But remember, the universities are in competition for good students. They know you've applied to 4 other universities at least. So they will be wanting to have opportunities to promote themselves. Now, I don't think we should be blasé about anything, but I think we can, when the timing of an interview, whether, and also in invitations to visit universities, it could be an open day for prospective students, prospective applicants. It could be an applicant's day, so people who have applied, they come along. Clearly, the universities there are maybe assessing in a more informal way the applicants, or even they hold offer holders day, where really they're trying to influence the students to put that university down as a firm or insurance choice. But yeah, those are in the main the 3 added factors that you would have.
And what kind of steps can a student take to ensure that they're making the most competitive application through the UCAS system, in your opinion?
I mean, we can't hide from the fact that the more competitive the course, so the higher grades that are required, you really need a strong academic profile and an appropriate academic profile. So, for example, to come to us for A-levels and say, I want to apply for medicine, and in your own country, having studied very little biology and chemistry, that will be seen as a weakness. So have the subjects, and most people, even in the UK with GCSEs, they can do enough subjects that they're not pressured to say, oh, I can only do this one course at university. You're leaving lots of doors open, but you don't want to shut any doors either. So, if you are thinking of architecture further on as a possibility, make sure that you've got the physics, possibly have the art in there as well. Above all, get good grades. Get good grades, but also know your subjects, because as we said with Oxbridge last week, if there's an interview situation, if there's an admissions test where they're not testing you specifically on A-level knowledge, the wider your knowledge, the more enthusiastic your knowledge, the better. So any university application, I would say 90% of what you do to make it competitive is academic. And again, I absolutely include having a very good level of English, not just in test certificate terms, but also in practical terms. You know, set yourself the challenge whereby you are confident to communicate just how enthusiastic you are about the course you want to do at university, the career you want to have, and to equally fluently, eloquently express your how you've reflected on your experiences, etc. So academic, absolutely. Hand in hand with that, research. Okay, I think it's really important that people in researching, the goal before you start, say, a 2-year course for A-levels, is not to come here at the start of year 12 saying, okay, I've done my research, I'm applying for this course at these 5 universities. I'm applying for this course, fine, but we will ask why, what else have you considered? But I would say the main kind of fruits or benefits of research before you start year 12, it's a bit different if you join us for year 13 for a 1-year foundation course, of course, is that you have familiarized yourself with what is on offer. And a lot is on offer. It's actually, the risk is getting lost, but be aware of just how much is on offer. Find the kind of course that you're interested in. Look up the detail. Do not rely on secondhand information. You know, even someone who's been to the university, because the course may change, especially if it's kind of a technology related thing that's changing all the time. But look at the university website, look at what they teach in the course in the first year, particularly the second and the third year, possibly a fourth year if it's in Scotland or there's a master's, because they'll give you more options. And you're not making choices, but you're seeing the kind of course that interests you, that makes you enthusiastic, attracts you, but also you think you've got the skills for, you can build towards. As I said, doing the research before joining us is not about reaching conclusions. It's about having lots of knowledge or facts, which will then help you with our guidance to reach those well-informed conclusions. So academics, research.
Excellent. Thank you, David. That's the end of kind of the formal questions. So please, if anyone has any questions, do let me know, and feel free to post that via the chat or via the Q&A. We did have a few pre-registration questions, which thank you very much for sending those. But if you do have any in real time based upon what David's been saying, please do fire those through and we'll do our best to answer those in the next few minutes. We had a few questions, David, and I think we can talk about this kind of generally about how kind of we help our students to support the application and I suppose kind of build those elements that make it kind of more likely to be a successful application. So obviously you can refer to what we do here in Cambridge, and all of our colleges will kind of do that in their own way as well. So do similar sorts of things. But what should you be looking for as a student from a college in terms of support towards your university application to make it successful?
It needs to be collaborative. And I would say this. I mean, obviously, I'm going to suggest that what we do, and I think the results show it, is a good way of approaching it, an effective way of approaching it. I will try to keep this brief, but I think the key thing with any application is the detail, and attention to detail is all the better if obviously the student is focused on it, but as are the people who guide them. And so the way we do it, and I am aware that some of our sister colleges have a similar approach, is that each student has their UCAS advisor. It will be one of the members of our academic staff. With very, very rare exceptions, that UCAS advisor will be have responsibility for no more than 5 students. So it's not dealing with 20, 30 students and administratively kind of processing an application. It's actually building the application with the students, asking them the right questions, doing the checking. And then the added layer is that the team I lead, the directors of studies, we are, you know, it's a bit of a pyramid. We are responsible or have oversight for the work of our own group of advisors. So we will be called into these meetings very often. These are timetabled. The students will, from the summer term of year 12, see their advisors twice a week,
Yes.
Or for 2 periods a week. So it's very much kind of a building process. And we as directors of studies will step in. Ultimately, we will be doing the final checks on every application, be it with the student for their side of the application and with the advisor for the reference side of the application.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of added level of scrutiny, not just to check that everything's correct, but everything's as strong as it can be. And, you know, as I said, with personal statements, as convincing as it can be.
Yeah.
So it's I would say, make sure that you've got someone who works with you hand in hand.
Yes.
Not that you get lost in a crowd.
Yeah. And it feels like, you know, in terms of what we offer across the group, it's a very structured approach in terms of there are these formal check-ins, it's timetabled, like you say. So it's not just based upon the student's demand.
Yeah.
They're put in place as kind of fundamentals of kind of their weekly timetable that they have these sessions.
It has to be systematic because, I mean, in our case, we deal with 180 year 13 students a year. We have consistently for the last few years. So there has to be a system in place. You can't have people falling through the gap. But as I said, that has to be completely balanced with attention to the individual.
Yeah.
It's a personalized approach.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excellent. And we had a question about just applying outside of UCAS, and I know that's what the route that some of our students go. So can you just talk us through briefly about, you know, where students might apply and why students might apply outside UCAS and how that kind of differs as a process?
Yeah, it is relatively typical for our students, international students, even, you know, the few UK ones, expat students we have, who will apply to other universities in other countries. I should also say you can, in certain instances, apply to other UK universities outside of UCAS. So, for example, I defer to our head of medicine, who I work very closely with, that we can make applications to the likes of Brunel, UCLan, University of Buckingham for medicine outside of UCAS. And again, alongside UCAS applications, you'd also get that in other cases like architecture. There's the Architecture Association in London, very typically for art. Lots of arts colleges you can apply for directly, including their art foundation courses, which is a first-year university course. It's not, you know, comparable to our foundations, pre-university foundations. But also we have students who apply to the US, to Canada, to Hong Kong, to their own countries as well. And we absolutely assist them in these applications. In as much as we check these applications, okay, it is very much the student's initiative. We provide the references, again, changing them as is appropriate, although the Americans and others will call them recommendation letters. Sometimes there are different documents, transcripts that need to be provided, etc. So this very much happens, you know, it's a commonplace thing. Last year, we had 6 students who went to the University of Melbourne. None of them from Australia, but that was a preference. It was their family's preference, etc. Very good courses. So it's very diverse. The key thing I would say, 2 key things are, don't overburden yourself with too many applications. Because as I said at the very start, what's unique about UCAS is you make one unit application, one personal statement for 5 universities. Every other system, you are basically doing, even if it's through something like the US Common App, what the individual university needs. And it becomes added workload. And ultimately, the applicant cannot lose sight of the fact that you can get the offers, but you're only going to get the place if you get your grades.
Yes.
And therefore, you know, study has to be maintained as a priority. Plus, a scattergun approach is never a sensible one, simply because it kind of suggests that the students, possibly their parents, etc., really aren't sure where they want them to go. Okay, you can only have so many insurances, but we get involved with the students to, you know, set priorities, to select, and also to work out the prioritization between the UCAS universities and the others. One point I will make, though, this is a really, really important thing that's probably developed quite recently. If anybody has in mind to make a US application, and particularly one of the most competitive types of applications, you know, the sort of very kind of highbrow Ivy League, but possibly universities in the US, by early decision, so this is the November deadline, it's really important with those universities who talk to each other. If the applicant gets an offer, they will have signed a contract that if they get an offer, they must accept it. They must go there. That voids means you cannot have a UCAS application alongside that. So we have to be really careful about that. Obviously, if the student applies to those universities, doesn't get an offer, then obviously we can do a UCAS application.
Yeah.
But as I said, it's, you know, strategizing is important. So again, talking one-to-one with the students, possibly with families, it's important that we're all on the same page. So we can make a kind of a, you know, concerted plan.
Yeah, and I think, you know, very much it seems like, you know, understanding that if we want to make an application outside, especially overseas, to do that early, to sort of identify that, and to really understand the demands that are going to be made upon you from that university, from that country as well.
I know we're short of time, but if I can just add, if somebody comes to us at the end of year 12, or even worse, the beginning of year 13, and says, oh, I'd like to apply to Harvard, Yale, Stanford, MIT, whatever, you need to bear in mind that US students will have been building those applications for 2 or 3 years. This cannot be a last minute decision. So it needs to be strategized, arguably more so than an Oxford application. So again, our role is to tell students where their efforts give them a chance of reward, but sometimes where their efforts are going to not be worthwhile.
Yeah.
Okay.
Excellent. So we've got a couple of questions that have come through. We'll probably put them together because just so we finish up nice on time. How important are academic predicted grades? And then, you know, for non-native English speakers, how important are those English language qualifications when they're making the application?
Fine. I will be brief here because to a large extent, I think it was said before, predicted grades are important because the university needs to know that the student has a likelihood, is considered by their school or college to have a realistic chance of achieving the grades required. But I must again emphasize that, and we do have to repeat this to students at the end of year 12, saying that, you know, you want to apply for an A-star AA course, having 3 A stars will not make your application stronger. It doesn't kind of click logically for people because obviously you think, well, but I've got higher grades. And if anything, in some instances, it's a risk because a university which typically might make an offer of A-star AA, if they see a 3 A-star prediction, there is a chance that they will say, okay, prove it, and make a double A-star A offer. So again, we need to be judicious about this. Obviously, if the student deserves to have 3 or 4 A stars, that's the starting point of the conversation. The English requirement, this will be my shortest answer. It is absolutely fundamental because even if there's a small chance that a university which requires 3 A's and the student gets AAB might still give them the place, depending on availability. We had that a bit with UCL last year, so we're talking about very, very good university which did kind of lower grades, possibly because of the politics of grade boundaries, etc. They are not going to do it for IELTS or other English CELT requirements, because that's the kind of the threshold, the level they have agreed with the UKVI from a British immigration visa point of view. So
it's non-negotiable.
It could make or break an application. So please, please, please come here with good English and looking to improve it and to make English-speaking friends, you know, whether they're of other nationalities. So,
and I think it's important to understand the kind of level of English support that you're going to get as well in the college that you're choosing as well. Make sure that's in place and ask questions about it through the application process to the college itself, because that is key, as David says. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, David, for your insightful and thorough answers. If anyone does have any questions post, we will send a recording. We will send some information. So if anyone has any questions post, please do respond to that email with the questions and we'll do our best to answer them. But we'll let you get on with your day wherever you are in the world and say thank you very much and goodbye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.